This video discusses the likely outcome of the latest round of fighting between the Jews and the Palestinians in Israel based on Bible prophecy. Hello friends, this is Unmasked Truth with Harmanjeet Saini, where I provide unique analysis of world events based on the unmasked truth that after surrender, Germany continued World War II clandestinely and became a killing machine. I also provide true news that you will find nowhere else. There has been fighting between the Palestinians and the Jews before in the state of Israel. In fact, much worse than the current round. But many analysts are predicting that the fighting is going to get much worse. More than 210 Palestinians, including nearly 50% of them women and children, and 10 Jews have already died, with Hamas having fired more than 3,440 rockets into Jewish cities, and Israel having retaliated with airstrikes and artillery fire. Some rockets have also been fired into Israeli territory from Lebanon. I agree with the news analysts and feel that the fighting is going to get more serious this time. My prediction, however, is not based on an analysis of facts on the ground and the statements of leaders of the belligerents, but on a deeper understanding of Bible prophecy. But why should a biblical prophecy perspective of world events be of any interest to anyone? The reason is that Germany and German masqueraders in America pay very close heed to Bible prophecy. They, in fact, take actions with the goal of fulfilling prophecy. I will provide evidence of that in this message. Many German masqueraders also consider themselves prophets who are in God's church and understand prophecy very well, as taught by the late Herbert W. Armstrong. However, interpretations of prophecy can differ, and there have been differences in interpretations of prophecy between my interpretations and those of the German masquerader prophets. Modern nations in the world are not mentioned by their modern names in the Bible, but under their ancient names. So, two kinds of differences in interpretation of prophecy can arise. A, due to differences in understanding the biblical identity of modern nations in the Bible, and B, due to understanding the correct sequence of events. There are no real differences in understanding of the biblical identity of modern great nations between me and the German masquerader prophets. But some differences have developed on whether prophecies concerning ancient nations apply to the descendants of the nations who may now be geographically located elsewhere, or they apply to the geographical area. For example, Bible prophecies mention the Babylonian system. A few German masquerader prophets and the Germans seem to think the prophecies apply to the territory of ancient Babylon, which is located in modern Iraq. Most of us think they apply to the successors of the ancient Babylonian religious military system, which is the seventh and last resurrection of the Holy Roman Empire, with the Pope of the Roman Church being its religious head and the German dictator being its military head. I will discuss how this understanding of the Germans has played a recent role in the events in Iraq and Syria. There are major differences in understanding of the correct sequence of end time events between me and the German masquerader prophets. This is the only issue on which I was delivered a message by an angel of God. Of course, when someone claims that he has received a message from God through an angel, that person is automatically considered a crackpot or a demon influenced individual. In fact, that is how I was labeled by almost all the German masquerader prophets for nearly 15 years. However, God Himself provided proof that He had delivered messages to me through angels. The very first message that was delivered to me was that I was of Jewish ancestry. I shared that message with the local pastor in my church. Then, 4 years later, God delivered a message to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II of the United Kingdom that I was also a descendant of King David, who was a Jew. That provided incontrovertible proof that God had delivered messages to me through angels. The only message concerning the correct sequence of end time events was delivered to me on October 9th or 10th, 1998. The message was that Revelation 8 verses 7 to 12 are describing the subduing of the king of the south by the king of the north mentioned in Daniel 11 verses 40 to 43. So Daniel 11:40 to 45 state, "At the time of the end, the king of the south shall attack him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots, horsemen, and with many ships. And he shall enter the countries, overwhelm them, and pass through. He shall also enter the glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown. But these shall escape from his hand: Edom, Moab, and the prominent people of Ammon. He shall stretch out his hand against the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. He shall have power over the treasures of gold and silver, and over all the precious things of Egypt. Also the Libyans and Ethiopians shall follow at his heels. But news from the east and the north shall trouble him. Therefore he shall go out with great fury to destroy and annihilate many. And he shall plant the tents of his palace between the seas and the glorious holy mountain. Yet he shall come to his end, and no one will help him." This war is described in Revelation 8 verses 6 to 13. "So the seven angels who had the seven trumpets prepared themselves to sound. The first angel sounded, and hail and fire followed mingled with blood, and they were thrown to the earth. And a third of the trees were burnt up, and all green grass was burnt up. Then the second angel sounded, and something like a great mountain burning with fire was thrown into the sea, and a third of the sea became blood, and a third of the living creatures in the sea died, and a third of the ships were destroyed. Then the third angel sounded, and a great star fell from heaven burning like a torch, and it fell on a third of the rivers and on springs of water. The name of the star is Wormwood. A third of the waters became wormwood, and many men died from the water because it was made bitter. Then the fourth angel sounded, and a third of the sun was struck, a third of the moon, and a third of the stars, so that a third of them were darkened. A third of the day did not shine, and likewise the night. And I looked, and I heard an angel flying through the midst of heaven, saying with a loud voice, Woe, woe, woe to the inhabitants of the earth, because of the remaining blasts of the trumpet of the three angels who are about to sound. That message from the angel has been a key piece of the puzzle that enabled me to develop a sequence of end-time events that differs from what our church understood previously, and that has since been developed by the German masquerader prophets. We all agree that the King of the North refers to a German-led union of 10 kings or rulers in Europe, and the King of the South refers to a leader in the Islamic world. Daniel 11:40-43 mentions a war between the two kings. The central focus of all prophecies is the defeat and enslavement of the alliance of America, British Commonwealth nations, and the Jewish state of Israel at the hands of a German-led European alliance, which is allied with the Islamic world and other nations. German masquerader prophets and I differ on where in the sequence of all end-time events this event fits in, with my interpretation being based on the message delivered to me by the angel. The sequence of end-time events as God's church understood it previously when Mr. Armstrong passed away on January 16, 1986 was as follows. First, world crisis began in the Middle East as described in Daniel 11:40-45. King of the North is the seventh resurrection of the Holy Roman Empire in Europe, led by a German dictator. King of the South is an Islamic leader. The crisis begins when the King of the South pushes at the King of the North and provokes him in some way. Second, King of the North attacks the King of the South and defeats him. After defeating the King of the South and occupying Egypt, Libya, and Ethiopia, the armies of the King of the North surround Jerusalem. Number 3. Then the King of the North attacks the American, British, and Jewish alliance and defeats them in 30 days, beginning the 3.5-year long or 1,260 days Great Tribulation. The American, British, and Jewish slaves are sold around the world. Number 4. The Great Tribulation continues for 2.5 years, at the end of which the world experiences an earthquake and sees the heavenly signs as part of the sixth seal mentioned in Revelation 6 verses 12 to 17. Fifth, the heavenly signs usher in the day of the Lord, which is 1 year of God's wrath on the nations of the world, pictured by the seventh seal with its 7 trumpets and 7 bowls in the book of Revelation. But according to the sequence of events revealed to me by God's angels, the event in which the king of the north attacks the king of the south takes place 2.5 years after the Great Tribulation has begun, and not before it has begun. It is in fact the first event of the day of the Lord, which is the last 1 year of the Great Tribulation. To prove me wrong and a false prophet influenced by demons, the Germans and the German masquerader prophets tried to fulfill the prophecies according to their own interpretations of the sequence of events. According to their prophetic interpretations, Iran is the king of the south, and prophecies concerning Babylon pertain to the land known as modern Iraq, which was the land area in which ancient Babylonian Empire ruled. According to the Church of God interpretation, the Babylonian system is the seventh resurrection of the Holy Roman Empire, led by the Pope and the German dictator, which will be destroyed by Jesus Christ when he returns to earth, never to be resurrected again. To fulfill various prophecies, the Germans orchestrated the formation of ISIS or ISIL, or the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, or the Islamic State or Islamic Caliphate. Al-Qaeda was a German creation under Osama bin Laden. ISIL, which originated in 1999, had merged with Al-Qaeda in 2003 after Iraq was invaded by a coalition of USA, Britain, and other Western nations. Then in June 2014, ISIL proclaimed itself an Islamic Caliphate, claiming religious, political, and military authority over all Muslims in the world. Then ISIS began troubling Israel. Germany was planning to fulfill their interpretation of the sequence of events by destroying ISIS under the guise of protecting Israel and the Jews. That would fulfill their prophecy of Babylon being destroyed. Then they would attack and defeat Iran, which would fulfill the prophecy of the king of the north defeating the king of the south. Then the Germans would double cross and surround Israel with their armies. When they are ready, they would attack the United States, British Commonwealth nations with nuclear weapons and defeat them and the state of Israel in a 30-day war. This is mentioned in Hosea 5 verses 5 and 7. And the pride of Israel does testify to his face. Therefore shall Israel and Ephraim fall in their iniquity. Judah also shall fall with them. They have dealt treacherously against the Lord, for they have begotten strange children. Now shall a month devour them with their portions, to fulfill the prophecy of enslaving and destroying them in the Great Tribulation. Presumably, in their sequence of events, since Babylon would have already been destroyed, Germany would not be destroyed and would rule the world for 1,000 years with Satan as their god. I think the Germans were on the verge of attacking ISIS and Iran, but it did not go as planned. Satan did not give them the go-ahead to take that step. As a result, ISIS's caliphate was destroyed when the United States and Britain intervened on the behalf of the Iraqis, and Russia intervened on the side of the Syrians, and the surviving fighters have gone underground. The Germans tried to fulfill prophecies according to their own interpretations, but were not successful, as Satan did not give them the go-ahead. They have been forced to acknowledge that the message delivered to me by God's angel was genuine. So they have to follow the sequence of end-time events as revealed to me to fulfill prophecy. I have described that sequence in detail in my book, World and Bible Prophecy, and a summary version in the booklet titled Summary of a Sequence of End-Time Events. Both are available free of charge on my website, www.churchofgodmessage.com. So, what are the implications of the sequence of events for the latest Israeli Palestinian conflict? Briefly, the sequence of events is provided in the messages of the seven seals of the book of Revelation, which is as followed. The first event is the Third World War involving the United States, British Commonwealth nations, and the State of Israel on one side, and an alliance of nations led by Germany on the other side. The German alliance includes Islamic nations mentioned in Psalm 83. This war is pictured by the first four seals of Revelation 6, verses 1 to 8. The fifth seal, mentioned in Revelation 6, verse 11, that follows the Third World War, pictures a 3.5 year long Great Tribulation. This means the American, British, and Jewish alliance has been militarily defeated by the German led alliance, people removed from their lands and sold around the world as slaves. Germany will most likely divide up Europe into 10 regions and appoint a ruler over each one who will give total allegiance to the German dictator. Now, after the military defeat of the American, British, and Jewish alliance, Germany's Muslim allies fight with the other nations descended from the 12 tribes of Israel, who now live in France, Switzerland, Ireland, Benelux, and Scandinavian countries. These nations will lose a lot of their population, perhaps 50 to 70%, in this terrible war lasting more than 2 years, but will not be militarily defeated. Number 4. After 2 years, cracks begin to appear in the German Islamic alliance and between the German led Europe and other alliance partners such as China and other nations. By this time, a leader will have emerged in the Islamic world whom prophecies identify as the King of the South. He will begin taking some provocative actions against the German dictator, the King of the North. Number 5. After 2.5 years of the Great Tribulation, the next event is the Great Earthquake and a meteor showers, as pictured by the sixth seal of Revelation, chapter 6, verses 12 to 17. Number 6. Then the day of the Lord begins, which is the last 1 year of the Great Tribulation. The events during the year are described as part of the seventh seal, which is divided into 7 trumpets, with the 7th trumpet being further subdivided into 7 bowls or vials, with each bowl picturing a plague. Number 7. The first event in the day of the Lord, pictured by the first 4 trumpets, is the attack by the King of the North on the King of the South for his provocations, leading to a devastating defeat for the King of the South. This is in Revelation 8, verses 1 to 12. This specific event and where it fits in the sequence of events was revealed to me by the angel. The German dictator now sits on his military field headquarters in Jerusalem. After the King of the North attacked the King of the South, Eastern nations had started mobilizing for a possible war with the King of the North. All indications are that the Eastern nations will be united in an alliance to war with the King of the North. This means that the German alliance with the nations of the East, such as China and India, will have also broken down, as had the German alliance with the Islamic nations. German-led Europe makes a preemptive strike against the Eastern alliance known as the Kings of the East with biological and chemical weapons, pictured by the 5th trumpet of the 7th seal, mentioned in Revelation 9, verses 1 to 11. The kings of the East also use similar biological weapons against Europe. The terrible effects of the weapons last for 5 months, with human beings actually preferring to die because of the pain and suffering, but death will elude them. The suffering will probably be worse than the worst that COVID-19 is causing, with the added problem that the suffering will not be cut short by death. Number 9. After 5 months, kings of the East retaliate against Europe with a 200 million man army, pictured by the 6th trumpet of the 7th seal in Revelation 9, verses 13 to 18. Europe is utterly devastated. Number 10. Now the nations are contemplating utterly destroying each other, particularly Europe, with the German dictator still alive in Jerusalem with a significant portion of his army to stave off utter destruction by using all their nuclear weapons. If this war is not stopped, no flesh would be saved alive on earth, as stated by Jesus in Matthew 24, verses 21 to 22. Jesus Christ will then intervene by returning to earth and taking over the kingdoms of the world. Revelation 11, verses 13 to 8, and Matthew 24, verses 26 to 27. Number 11. Nations don't submit to Jesus Christ's rule. They don't comply with Jesus' demand to release their American, British, and Jewish slaves. So Jesus Christ pours out his plagues on them, pictured by the first 5 vials of Revelation 16, verses 1 to 11. Number 12. These plagues make the nations hopping mad. Revelation 16, verses 13 to 14. So they gather at Armageddon, the hill of Megiddo in Israel, and then move to Jerusalem to attack Jesus Christ and the saints. Of course, all the enemies or the armies of the world that came to Jerusalem are destroyed, mentioned in Revelation 16, verses 12 to 16, pictured by the 6th vial or bowl. Number 13. Then Jesus Christ punishes the nations for having sent their armies to attack him by causing the greatest ever earthquake in the history of mankind that flattens every city and mountain. In addition, 100-pound hailstones destroy those who refuse to submit to Jesus Christ, as pictured by the 7th vial in Revelation 16, verses 12 to 17. So, what are the implications of this sequence of end-time events in prophecy for the current Palestinian-Israeli conflict? It is not necessary that the king of the south or a pan-Islamic leader be established at this stage, but to defeat the American, British, and Jewish alliance according to prophecy, an Islamic-German alliance is necessary according to Psalm 83. Now, Psalm 83, verses 1 to 8 state, "Do not keep silent, O God, do not hold your peace, and do not be still, O God, for behold, your enemies make a tumult, and those that hate you have lifted up the head. They have taken a crafty counsel against your people, Israel, and against your sheltered ones, which is God's church, part of which will already have fled to the place of safety. They have said, Come and let us cut them off from being a nation, and the name of Israel may be remembered no more. For they have consulted together with one consent. They form a confederacy against you, the tents of Edom, whose descendants are the Palestinians and most Turks, and also live in Central Asia, such as Turkmenistan, etc., and the Ishmaelites, the Arabs, the Moab, southern parts of Jordan, and the Hagarites, Syria, and North Arabians. Gebal is Ammon, is Lebanon, and Ammon, northern parts of Jordan, and Amalek, a branch of Edomite Palestinians. Turks and also living in Central Asia, Philistia, the Gaza Strip. This is an illustration where in prophecy the people in the geographical area are the key rather than the ancient biblical name, with the inhabitants of Tyre, southern Lebanon, and Hezbollah, and then Assyria also has joined with them. They have helped the children of Lot, meaning Moab and Ammon, in Jordan. We must be cautious here because the exact location of the descendants of these ancient peoples is uncertain. In addition to the above indicated countries, these peoples may be spread over many of other mainly Muslim countries, such as in Central Asia, but still be generally in the regions indicated. In fact, many of the descendants live in South America, in North America, and Europe as Muslim immigrants. The alliance includes practically the entire Arab world. The psalm also mentions the tents of Edom and the Ishmaelites. This means that the Turks and the Arabs will invite other Muslim countries and their citizens who would be willing to fight in the armies in the fight, that is jihad, against the Israelites, meaning USA, Britain, Canada, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, and the State of Israel. A precedent has already been set by ISIS and Al Qaeda. Occupation of Jerusalem will be one of their goals because of the Islamic holy places. Now, do you see why Germany has its hand thick in the Middle East? The Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, ISIL, Al Qaeda, Taliban, and every Muslim terror group everywhere in the world, such as the Philippines, Indonesia, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Sri Lanka, Nigeria, East Africa, etc., are all German creations and have their blessings. Various Muslim groups allied with Germany are still fighting for control of Syria under ISIL defeat. Iraq is mostly an Iranian proxy. All Palestinians everywhere in the world, including in Israel, Jordan, Lebanon, Hezbollah, Syria, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Egypt, North America, and Europe. They are forbidden to Germany. Even Iran is a German ally now because it is an ally of China, the closest Germany ally. In fact, General Soleimani of Iran was almost ready to start a war with the United States because of German-Chinese bidding, but was assassinated in a drone strike. Obviously, to subdue the United States, British Commonwealth nations, and the State of Israel, some form of nuclear strike or other such weapons are necessary, including starting a full-blown civil war because of the huge population of German masqueraders and their allies in these countries. Ezekiel 7 verse 11 states, "Therefore they have blown the trumpet, even to make all ready, but none goes to the battle, for my wrath is upon all the multitude thereof." This indicates that masqueraders and the Indian and Chinese ally who had major US high-tech companies will use their power to sabotage military installations, nuclear facilities, electric and utility grids, and the transportation infrastructure. They will also start wholesale bloodshed in the cities and rural areas, especially in America, because they are armed to the teeth with guns and misery assault style weapons. The first four seals indicate that after the war is started, perhaps using nuclear weapons strategically while sabotaging US and British weapon system and the bloodshed that will be caused by civil war, the US and Britain would be weakened with their infrastructure destroyed. This will lead to famine conditions and diseases, further weakening them. After the war and the civil war are started, the task of physically taking over the lands will remain. That's where mostly Muslims will be used as part of Chinese soldiers. Because of the famine and disease conditions, it would be easy for Germany, the Muslims, and the Chinese to play on an economic blockade of America, British Commonwealth nations, and Israel. Finally, in a 30-day war based on Hosea 5 verse 7, they could consider the coup de grace to the American, British, and Jewish influence. Daniel 8 verses 23 to 24 state, "And in the latter time of their kingdom shall the transgressors come to the full. A king of fierce countenance and understanding dark sentences shall stand up, and his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. For he shall destroy wonderfully, and shall prosper and practice, and shall destroy the mighty." America, British Commonwealth nations, and Israel, and the holy people, meaning members of God's church. "And through his policy also he shall cause cunning craftiness to prosper in his hand, and he shall magnify himself in his heart, and by peace shall destroy many. He shall also stand up against the Prince of Princes, which is Jesus Christ, but he shall be broken without hand. These verses describe the type of leader who will lead Germany. He is not acting under his own power, but that of Satan, like Hitler was. That describes the Germans perfectly. He uses cunning craftiness and mystery, dark, deceiving sentences. Have you noticed that in the current Palestinian-Israeli conflict, Egypt is making statements against the Palestinians and supporting Israel? Those are the dark sentences coming from the Germans. Don't be fooled by them. The Germans took the destruction of America, British Commonwealth nations, and the State of Israel, and are using the Palestinians and other Muslims all over the world, are allied with them to accomplish that goal along with other global allies. Obviously, no one is going to issue a warning that they are going to use the nuclear weapons at some particular time. So literally a nuclear war could start any day. Satan did not give the demons his assent to start the Third World War when ISIL had held up the Islamic Caliphate in parts of Syria and Egypt, because they were not following God's prophesied sequence of end-time events. But now the Germans have been able to orchestrate events that fit the sequence of end-time events. Therefore, they could start the war anytime. That's true, church, and I never set dates for specific events. But the current Palestinian-Israeli conflict indicates that Germany, India, China, and the Muslim world could start their war any day. That is the implication of end-time prophecies for their conflict. Thank you very much for watching this video. Please continue to watch my videos and read my articles on important world events. World War II watch, III watch, politics, international business, advice on health and medical problems, and much more for in-depth and insightful analysis. Please also subscribe to my Facebook channel www.unmaskedtruth.org to view and get information on the table videos.